Started, Mike. Hi everyone, I'm Cristina Contreras, and I'm just going to go over the human library rules that you see up on the screen. Rule number 1, the reader must leave the book in the same mental and physical condition as borrowed. It is forbidden to cause damage to the book or hurt her or his dignity in any other way. The reader is responsible for preserving the condition of the book. Rule 2. The reader accepts the fact that the book can quit the conversation if she or he feels that the reader treats her or him in an inappropriate manner or hurts her or his dignity. 3. The reader acknowledges that the volunteers will be on hand to maintain and care for the book's well-being. Last rule, the reader agrees to participate in follow-up surveys and other means of contact regarding this learning experience. And then I'll pass the mic to Kathleen and stop sharing my screen.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Christina and I are part of the One World Committee that's hosting the Virtual Living Library, and we're excited to welcome Tamara Thorpe, who is best known as the Millennials Mentor, and she will talk about connecting across generations. You're in for a real treat, I promise. And she will share some generational differences, debunk the myths and stereotypes, and highlight some unique talents of each generation. Welcome, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Kathleen and Christina, for the invitation to be here today and to be a book. I'm very excited to share a little bit about what I know around generational differences and bridging those differences. It looks like we've got several people who've come in to borrow this book. So before I get started, I'd love to know from the people who joined what brought them to this session and perhaps what they hope to learn from borrowing me as a book. So you can enter it in the chat, or if you're comfortable unmuting yourself to let me know what brought you here today.
Tamara, I am here because your bio sounded so interesting, especially related to just generations. And we think sometimes there's so many disconnections, but we fail to understand how much the youth has to offer. So I'm looking forward to what you are going to share with us.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to sharing. Is there anybody else who wants to unmute yourself and let me know, or post something in the chat? All right. Well, I hope, Azra, that I can share a little bit with you and with everybody else how I ended up as the Millennials Mentor and what exactly I do as the Millennials Mentor. So I think, as you said, something that I've always appreciated is with connecting with people of all different ages. And very early in my life growing up, I've had some really powerful mentors, from my mother to teachers and colleagues. And all of these mentors have played such an important role in my life in terms of guiding my path and supporting me on personal issues, professional issues. It's just made all the difference in the world. And I've always wanted to provide that same sort of support and mentorship for other people. And so from very early on in my career, I've reached out to younger people. I was a youth leader in my church. I've worked with youth in different sort of camps and extracurricular programs. And it's just something that has been a real passion of mine, to be able to mentor people who are younger than me. And as I started my work as a leadership and organizational development consultant and working with leaders and teams on how to be better, I saw that there was a real call within my network from young professionals who, had been teenagers when I worked with them, but had grown up and were moving into their careers, who had a real thirst and passion in developing their leadership. And it was really through that call from this network of young people I had in my life and supporting their leadership development that I became the Millennials Mentor. And through my work offering mentoring and leadership opportunities for people at all different stages of their leadership development. And as I was doing this work, and as I've been doing this work for many years now, as was said, one of the things that I've noticed is sometimes there's a lot of misunderstandings between generational cohorts. And just like when we think about other types of differences, whether they be gender or race or culture, these kind of misunderstandings, if they go unchecked, can have really profound effects. And so one of the things that I found in my work, in addition to working with next generation leaders on their leadership development, is a real need to talk with teams and leaders about how we can leverage all of our age differences and really form connections across generational differences. And this is not just about one generation, but all of us. I think one of the challenges that we face today is that in the last 10, 15 years, the world has changed so much because of technology, because of the economic crisis. And so when I was starting in my career, in the workplace, we had two generations, maybe one or two people from a third generation. But one of the things that we're seeing today as some of our former generations have remained in the workplace, and as people are entering the workplace younger, and as the economy is changing and how people do business is changing because of technology, we will see companies and teams that can have up to 5 generations working together. And that creates an abundance of challenges as well as opportunities that we want to make sure that we're able to resolve those challenges and really leverage those opportunities. So I'll just share with you all today a little bit about how these generational differences show up. One of the things we know is that every generation, as they're coming of age in their late teens and 20s, has been criticized. So that the baby boomers were labeled the me generation, and Gen Xers were heavily criticized, my generation. And we know that millennials were called the me generation. But every single generation has been criticized and challenged, considered to be the generation that has lost the morality of the former generation. And even today, as I've been working with millennials quite a bit over the last 10 years, now as a new generation starts to enter the workforce, we see this generation starting to take some criticism and some heat about the qualities and characteristics that they bring. And so I think that this is something to recognize, that there's something about our culture, our society, where we encourage the next generation to be different, but when they are different, that can be really confusing and be a source of conflict. And so one of the ways in which we tackle this is sort of by understanding that no generation has the market on being different or complex or being criticized. That being said, millennials are unique in that they're the most researched generation of any generation. There has been more surveys and reports and research done on this generation. And as I said, I think really comes out of this VUCA environment, right? Is we now live in an economy that is more volatile and uncertain and complex, and people struggle to navigate it. The gig economy is created such a change in how people do business that can be difficult for all of us to navigate. I remember the first time I told my dad I was taking an Uber, and he was terrified. He was like, how can you get in a car with a perfect stranger? And I said, what do you think a taxi is? And when I get into a car with a taxi, there's no way to track the route I'm on. There's no way to track the driver. There's no way to track the payment. That I'm far more secure in an Uber than I am in a taxi. But again, his generational frame of it was quite different. And when one generation is comfortable with and another generation is comfortable with is different because of the way that they were raised and the environment they were raised in and the things that they knew. So when we talk about generational cohorts, these are the group of people we're really talking about, from traditionalists to Gen Z, and then also this alpha generation or Gen C. We don't know. I think a lot of the conversation this year is, what's the generation of children born this year and next year? How will this impact them along with Gen Z? So this slide's just to give us some context about who we're talking about. And just so I have an idea of who's here, if you could just put into the chat which generation you identify with. Maybe the years don't match. Maybe you were born a certain year and you don't feel like a Gen X, or you feel like a boomer, or maybe you were, by year you're a millennial, but you really feel like a Gen Xer. But if you guys if you can, just put in the chat which generation you are. Then I have a sense of who's here. We have Azra, who's a millennial, one Gen Z, another millennial. So it looks like we've got a nice millennial-sized crowd here. That's fantastic, and some Gen Z. That's really great. As I said, I'm a Gen Xer. And I think, Milo, Gen Y, Gen X, right? There are a lot of us who feel real on the cusp. I have a friend who, by the year framework, she should be a baby boomer, but she feels very strongly like a Gen Xer. And I meet lots of folks who are older millennials, sometimes called Zennials, because they feel like they're really on the cusp. And I think that that's one of the things to understand, that there is some fluidity to this, and nothing is so rigid when we look at what shapes the generation and how we're different from one another. So one of the things that I like to share is this definition of culture, and because one of the things that I do as a leadership coach and trainer is talk with teams about difference, whether that, as I said, could be gender, race, culture. I do a lot of intercultural training and talk with people about cultures, different national cultures. And when I do, I really highlight that culture is a set of learned and shared values, beliefs, and behaviors of an interacting group of people. So anytime you get a group of people together, they develop this sort of shared mindset where they share common values, share common beliefs, and use those to inform how they behave. So our families have a specific culture, teams have cultures, organizations have cultures. And so we see these cultures emerge whenever you bring people together. And so then we also know that each generation has their own set of shared experiences that also shape their values, beliefs, and behaviors. And this is one of the things that is important for us to understand when we think about how we bridge cultural differences. We really want to kind of think about, what do we need to know to be able to bridge those differences? And we want to be generationally competent. We want to have the ability to understand generational differences in a complex way, because if we just say, baby boomers are rigid and millennials are, entitled, that conversation doesn't take us in very far. So we want to move past the stereotypes and understand our differences in a much more complex way. So to do that, we have got to suspend our judgment. There's a really great campaign done by, AARP, which we all know is an organization that provides resources, support, and services for people over 55. And a couple years ago, they put out an incredibly extensive report on research they did to look at age bias in the workplace for people 50 and older. And it was really profound. And one of the things that I recognize is that one of the things that generations have in common is folks who are younger and folks who are older are often written off and not taken seriously. That's a shared experience we have when we're young and when we're old, and the people in the middle tend to be the people who are relied on the most and maintain the most power. So we have to be willing to suspend judgment and challenge our bias, and we do that by watching and observing and listening, and then being able to shift our frame of reference, walk in someone else's shoes, see things from the other foot, and develop multiple interpretations, right? Is Uber unsafe? Yeah, sometimes Uber is unsafe. Is a taxi unsafe? Sometimes it is unsafe, right? And I can understand why sometimes people see things the way they do. Older folks trust banks. Younger folks don't trust banks. This has a lot to do with all of our experience from the past. So, older folks who've been around for a long time and been using the traditional banking system, it's been tried and true for them. For millennials and younger, banks have proven to be dishonest, unreliable, and insecure. And so it's not a place millennials feel comfortable in putting their money and resources. It's a different world, and so we have to be able to see how we can all see one thing in a very different way. And part of the learning process is asking questions and gathering more information, and then finding common ground. It can be really helpful to find the ways that are common, that sometimes we think that, what could baby boomers and millennials possibly have in common? But it's really profound, the things that millennials and baby boomers have in common. These are both two generations that grew up during a time of war. They are two generations that grew up during times of economic instability. They are both generations that have a greater comfort level with chaos and uncertainty. Gen Xers, we really struggle with uncertainty, where millennials and baby boomers are much more comfortable with that. And so that is something to be really mindful of. That's sometimes when we think there isn't anything in common, there's a lot more in common than we thought. So, we have to sometimes challenge our unconscious bias by being aware sometimes of the bias we have. As I said, AARP has this age bias campaign, and they have this great video where they ask some younger people, mostly millennials, what they think old looks like. And I think they gave them like someone who's 50. And I'm 50, and it was really like, I'm not that old. So I think sometimes we have to be aware, and I challenge people all the time as we use, ageist language when we talk about ourselves. Sometimes we might say to ourselves, oh, well, I'm too young to aspire to that, or I'm too young for that job, or I'm too young to be a leader, or, we use a lot of ageist language that gets in our own way, and that's something to be mindful of. And so part of that is accepting the truth that sometimes we have some blind spots and some judgments, and then to take action and really challenge ourselves to do better as we go through life. I gave myself a 30-day challenge to not use ageist language just in talking about myself to myself. And it was really hard. I didn't realize how deeply embedded that was just in my own self-talk. So as we move to be age inclusive, to be great mentors, coaches, and leaders, and to have, age diverse workforces and teams, these are skills in terms of generational confidence and challenging bias we really need to have so that we can be as age inclusive as we'd like to be. One of my favorite quotes I like to share comes from a lovely man named Jack Condon. He's based in Jemez, New Mexico, and he is a teacher and a mentor and somebody I hold near and dear to my heart. And one of my favorite quotes that he shares is that people around the world are different, but their needs are the same. But how they satisfy their needs, that is different. And that is what we mean by culture. So all of us have the need to be respected and trusted and taken seriously, to be recognized for our hard work. But sometimes that looks different. And so sometimes people will say, oh, well, millennials don't work hard. And then I say, well, what does work hard look like to you? And for so many people, work hard looks like, they're in the office for 12 hours versus how much work they actually produce. Millennials really evaluate how much work they do and how hard they work based upon what they produce. Whereas baby boomers evaluate hard work based upon, the number of hours you're sitting behind your desk. So sometimes we've got to challenge ourselves and ask more questions. So I just wanted to share some of these best practices in being a good mentor, forming relationships across generational differences. It is really about challenging our bias, entering into relationships with equity and mutual respect, and really being willing to process our differences and be open to unexpected learning. Sometimes we think we know things, but we don't always know what we don't know. So having learning conversations where we connect with people just to learn about them and their differences and listen intently, I think there's such a powerful part of bridging our differences. So I will now open it up to questions and discussions from anybody and everybody.
Feel free to put the questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, it's a smaller group, go ahead and do that.
And if I could actually ask a question, Azra, you wrote, that's why Robin Hood and Acorns is popular. What is Robin Hood and Acorns?
Sorry. It took me to figure out how to unmute again. Hi, everyone. So I hear a lot from even younger people who are looking at investments and not necessarily just hoarding money in a bank account or just spending it frivolously. They find a nice balance and they think that you can stretch your dollar. And they're just apps. They're apps, and the money is fluid. So if you ever want to take it out, you totally can. It's not locked in.
Yes.
And it's really brilliant.
That's right. They're investment apps. Thank you. That's really helpful. Yeah, it was interesting. I was doing a training last year with a group. It was a multi-generational training with a lot of bankers in the room. And on a tour of the city earlier, somebody had pointed out to me that the bank had a new building and all the executive offices were on the top floor. And so later when I was doing a training with all of them, I said, I think the building's beautiful. I think it's great that all the executives are at the top floor. But how much access does all your new and young talent have to the executives when all of the most seasoned talent is all exclusively sitting at the top of the building? Are you really giving access to your young talent? And if there's any industry that should be having conversations with young people, it's banks. And so I really encourage them to find ways to bridge the gap between the people on the first floor and the top floor, because the banking industry is really struggling to get young people to use banks. And one of the gentlemen said to me, well, do you think there'll be a boomerang effect and people will come back and trust banks again one day? And I said, no. I felt bad for discouraging him. But again, this is why having those intergenerational conversations are so important because, we see things like banks and churches really struggling. One of the best things for them to do is to start connecting with the people they're trying to attract in a new and different way, and have those learning conversations.
Since no one else is asking questions, I'm sorry. I'm going to
Go for it.
So, Tamara, do you find that businesses, like you just mentioned, like banking, there's just other institutions that are very brick and mortar and executive focused, and they have their, elite suites and such. I noticed with these startup type companies where they're very flat and the organizational model is just so much more cohesive and collaborative. Do you find the future of business must shift and change from your lens? Like, do you think to attain and retain talent that is going to be, up and coming, do you think it's just going to be where the situation is pushed, or do you think it's just happening gradually at all from your lens?
I would say from my lens, it's a yes and, right? So yes, businesses and organizations are changing and the cultures are shifting. We are seeing more and more businesses with a flattened hierarchy. And there are businesses and industries that will continue to run the same. I do a lot of work with Fortune 100 companies, and hierarchy and bureaucracy is strong and well maintained within these organizations. And I think, but they all fall into the same trappings, right? So tech companies still lack a tremendous amount of diversity for, around having women of color or having people of color and women in leadership positions the same way these Fortune 100 companies, Fortune 500 companies do. They all struggle to retain their young talent. These are because sometimes tech companies give the illusion that they're somehow getting it right, and companies think, oh, well, if I have a pool table and a beanbag, I'll be able to keep my millennials happy. When in reality, what makes people satisfied in work are high levels of belonging and engagement, and a sense of having opportunity to learn and grow. And so whether it's a traditional hierarchy or a flattened hierarchy, organizations have to start understanding and leveraging the diversity within their organization. And that means creating more space and opportunity for young talent to be engaged, to contribute, and to have their voices heard. Because I think I tell organizations today, the only difference is when young talent is dissatisfied, they will leave. Whereas my generation, when you were unhappy with your job, you thought, okay, well, I have to stick it out for 5 years. Your generation doesn't feel that way. Millennials say, I'm not happy, and they quit. And they either move on to another company or they start their own business from their laptop. That's, what I tell people, what I think is really different, and why organizations need to be more attentive, because people have more options today, whereas, before we stuck it out. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us and sharing your story and sharing your book with us. It was very insightful. And for the attendees, there was a link posted in the chat. If you could please go ahead and fill that out. That would be very helpful for us. And we hope you're able to join some more books. This is a fantastic event and an opportunity to hear many different stories. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Tamara, for joining us as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you both of you for being great hosts. Everybody have a great day.
Have a good day.